Picture this. It is the summer of 1969. English football is at the height of its cultural power. A few years earlier, England had won the World Cup. The game had become bigger than sport. Footballers were public figures, celebrities, and in some cases, national obsessions. At Wolverhampton Wanderers, there is a 23-year-old striker who some people believe could become one of the greats. He is fast, skillful, charismatic, and he scores goals. Fans love him. Bigger clubs are watching him. England's senior team feels like this is the next step. And then one day, someone knocks on his door. 2 Jehovah's Witnesses are standing there. He invites them in. They begin answering questions he has been carrying for years about death, grief, and what any of this is for. And within months, Peter Knowles walks away from professional football. Just days before his 24th birthday, one of the most promising footballers in England leaves the game behind. Wolves keep laying out his kit for training, match after match, convinced he will return. Contracts are sent to him for years. His family struggles to understand it. Supporters are stunned. Some are angry. Some are heartbroken. He never comes back. And more than 50 years later, he still said it was the right decision. To understand why Peter Knowles' story hit England the way it did, you have to understand who he was. He was born in 1945 in Fitzwilliam, a small mining village in Yorkshire, and football was in the family. His brother Cyril also played professionally. Like so many gifted players of his era, Knowles came from a working-class background where football offered one of the few paths to national visibility and real upward mobility. By the late 1960s, he had established himself as a serious talent at Wolverhampton Wanderers. He had helped the club in their promotion campaign, earned recognition at the youth international level, and was being talked about as a player with real top-level potential. Liverpool were interested. England was within reach. And from the outside, it looked like a career about to take off. But Knowles was carrying personal grief that the outside world could not see. He had lost his father, and he had experienced the kind of family loss that can leave a person asking very hard questions about life and death. And by his own account, he was not a religious man at the time. He was searching, but he did not yet have answers. And in 1969, while Wolves were in the United States for a promotional football tour, Knowles encountered Jehovah's Witnesses. The version of the story that has been repeated most often is simple. A knock on the door, a conversation, and a man who had been wrestling with grief suddenly finding a framework that made sense to him. And that meeting changed everything. He returned to England, attended a large Jehovah's Witness assembly at Wembley, and began formal Bible study with the witnesses, and within months, his life had taken a completely different direction. In September 1969, he played his last professional match. A short time later, the career everyone assumed was only beginning was over. Nobody around him thought the decision would last. It did. And this is the part of Peter Knowles' story that makes people stop and think. Because when he walked away from football, he did not step into a life of fame, comfort, or even easy reinvention. He had to build an ordinary life from scratch. He worked as a milkman. He cleaned windows. He eventually worked in a warehouse at Marks and Spencer. And that matters here because it reminds us how different football was in that era. Today, even players outside the global elite often have support systems, financial planning, branding opportunities, and post-career pathways. In Knowles' day, leaving the game could mean falling straight into the ordinary world with very little preparation. And yet, he has consistently said that he does not regret it. His story was so pervasive in the football world that a musician, Billy Bragg, made a song about it called God's Footballer. Because if you only frame Peter Knowles as a victim, You miss the part that makes the story difficult to dismiss. By all accounts, he is not bitter. He is not someone still trapped in public resentment. He appeared to have found peace inside the identity he chose. But at the same time, it is impossible to ignore the language he later used to describe football. He has spoken about crowd adulation in terms that mirror Watchtower thinking, ideas about idolatry, false worship, and the danger of placing human success above spiritual loyalty. And that is where the organization's influence becomes clearer. This was not just a man making a private life choice in a vacuum. He was being given a framework that transformed elite ambition into spiritual danger. Fame was not merely tempting, it was suspect. Public admiration was not just overwhelming, it was wrong. And that is a powerful way to reinterpret your own life. It can be liberating, can also be deeply controlling. So when people say Peter Knowles gave up football, that is true, but it is only half the story. The deeper question is, what meaning structure convinced him that giving it up was not a loss but a victory? And that is where the Watchtower story begins to repeat itself. Peter Knowles is not the kind of story you can flatten into a simple warning label. He is a man who was grieving. He found answers that felt real to him. He made a decision that changed his entire life, and he has lived with that decision for decades with conviction. That deserves respect, even from people who strongly disagree with the organization that shaped the choice. But it also deserves scrutiny, because when a high-control religion takes a talented, vulnerable young man and teaches him that the world's greatest achievements are spiritually empty or corrupt, that is not just a private belief. It is a mechanism for redirecting ambition, identity, and loyalty. And in Peter Knowles' case, the mechanism worked. Now I want to take you to a completely different part of the world. Because the Watchtower's reach is not limited to England, and it is not limited to one kind of convert. The next story comes from Ukraine, and it shows what happens when someone grows up inside the faith from childhood. Andriy Nesmachnyi was born in 1979 in Bryansk, then part of the Soviet Union. He grew up to become one of the most reliable defenders in Ukrainian football. He spent his entire professional club career at Dynamo Kyiv, one of the most prestigious clubs in Eastern Europe, and he became a long-serving international for Ukraine. His mother began studying the Bible when he was 12, and he was raised in Jehovah's Witness teachings from that point onward. So, unlike Knowles, who encountered the faith as an adult, Nesmachnyi did not arrive at those beliefs after a crisis. They were part of the world he grew up in. And by the time he reached elite football, the faith was already built into his identity. And then came the moment that made him widely discussed beyond football circles. At the 2006 World Cup in Germany, Ukraine's first ever World Cup appearance as an independent nation, Nesmachnyi did not sing the national anthem and did not place his hand over his heart during the pre-match ceremony. In a World Cup match on live television, standing with his teammates in front of the whole world, he remained silent. The Ukrainian media noticed immediately, and when asked about it, he explained that he and his family were Jehovah's Witnesses and that their beliefs would not allow them to give that kind of symbolic allegiance to a nation or flag. And for him, all worship and ultimate loyalty belonged to God. Whatever one thinks of that decision, the image is unforgettable. Nesmachny's silence at the World Cup is powerful because it reveals something deeper than one player's personal habit. It shows how Jehovah's Witnesses' doctrine reaches into public life. The organization teaches political neutrality. Members do not vote, they do not salute the flag, do not sing national anthems, and do not participate in military service. In ordinary circumstances, that can create awkward social moments. A school event, a workplace ceremony, a national holiday. Uncomfortable, yes, but manageable. In a World Cup setting, it becomes much more visible because the World Cup is not just a sporting event. It is one of the most nationalist spectacles in modern culture. The anthem, the flag, the camera, the crowd, the jersey, everything is designed to bind identity to nation. And Nesmachnyi stood in the middle of that ritual and refused the patriotic script. That is why the moment matters. And in the case of Ukraine, the issue carries even more weight. National identity there has been shaped by history, pressure, and conflict. And the symbolism of anthem and flag is not abstract. It is bound up with survival, independence, and resistance. So when a Ukrainian player stands silent at the World Cup because his religion forbids patriotic symbolism, the tension is real. Now, I'm not saying pacifism is inherently wrong. What I'm saying is that Jehovah's Witnesses' neutrality is not a neutral decision in the everyday sense. It is not the result of each member independently deciding where they stand on every issue. It is a doctrine handed down by the governing body and applied consistently regardless of national context or personal circumstance. That matters because once you see it in the case of Nesmachnyi, you can see the same structure in Peter Knowles' story. Different country, different age, different era. Same pattern. A person is taught that the deepest human symbols of belonging, achievement, and loyalty are spiritually dangerous unless they are subordinated to the organization's priorities. That is not a small influence. It is a total framework. So now we have two footballers from two different countries whose stories reveal two sides of the same movement. Peter Knowles was a gifted young English striker whose career ended after a profound personal encounter with Jehovah's Witnesses. Nesmachnyi was a successful Ukrainian defender who carried his faith into one of the world's most nationalistic sporting stages. Different stories, same organization in the background. And if you step back, the pattern becomes even clearer. The Watchtower consistently teaches that fame, money, patriotism, and worldly success are spiritually dangerous if they pull a person away from the organization. That message is effective because it speaks to a real human need, the desire for meaning. But the meaning comes with a cost. It comes through a system where the definitions are controlled from above, where sacrifice is praised, where doubt is discouraged, and where the community that celebrates your devotion is also the community that can withdraw approval if you question the rules. That is why these athletes' stories are so useful to the organization. They are not just inspiring testimonies, they become proof texts. They are turned into examples of what real faith looks like. And once that happens, the next generation grows up hearing the same lesson. If you are talented, if you are successful, if people admire you, that is precisely where spiritual danger begins. That is a deeper story here. Not just footballers, not just religion, but the way a high control system uses public sacrifice to reinforce private obedience. Peter Knowles still shared his faith door to door, and by every account he remained convinced that the path he chose was the right one. There's something emotionally honest in that. He was lost, in some sense. He found an answer, and he held on to it for the rest of his life. But there is also something haunting about the parallel life that never happened. A version of Peter Knowles in England colors, a version of him on the world stage, a version of him in Mexico in 1970. Not as a memory of what might have been, but as part of the real history of the game. And the Watchtower found him first. And once they gave him a framework for understanding ambition, grief, and loyalty, that parallel life was no longer a dream worth chasing. That is the story. And it is still playing out now, whenever talented people answer the door while they are searching for meaning. Because the next Peter Knowles is always somewhere in the world, gifted, grieving, vulnerable, and one conversation away from a very different life.